multiple levels of intelligence involved here, which has pointed to me for a very long while now to a group of people, at least two. There is someone behind the curtain who's more intelligent, more scheming, and then the individual who actually carries it out. Because one of the prime reasons for eliminating a person other than financial is that they know something, or that they've walked in on you doing something or are aware of something and you have to get rid of them. It's entirely possible that that happened elsewhere and somebody staged blood in the front of the house, the door being open in the back and so forth, to give the impression of an abduction, but she is actually killed somewhere else.
Hey guys, it's Jackson Buhai here with TMZ. Now we are approaching the 3-month mark since Nancy Guthrie was initially abducted. And as many of you know that have been following this case extensively, TMZ was one of the first media outlets to receive the ransom notes and alleged demand letters from a variety of people claiming to be involved in this case. Now, aside from that, there have been many topics of discussion regarding how many people were involved, what actually happened at the crime scene, what evidence was left behind, and what the authorities are doing to actually profile the person that abducted Nancy Guthrie in the first place. So talking to me today is Dr. Gary Brucato, a clinical and forensic psychologist. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
So something I want to get into is the dichotomy between what we see from the Nest doorbell video that Nancy Guthrie had at her front door and drawing a contrast between the behavior of the person in that video and the actual ransom letter that we received. Now, I can't exactly get into what it says specifically, but it seems to us, at least, and to also the authorities, that the person writing this letter was most likely the person that abducted Nancy Guthrie, but also someone that is very astute, someone that knew what they were doing, and someone that had been planning this abduction for a very, very long time. But it seems like someone in that video who is walking up to the camera, they kind of don't know what they're doing. They're trying to cover that camera with their hand before turning around and grabbing those shrubs to cover the camera. He seemed very disoriented, didn't seem like he was a career criminal. What are some things that stand out to you?
I think it's very astute to pick up on the fact that there are likely multiple psychologies and multiple levels of intelligence involved here, which has pointed to me for a very long while now to a group of people, at least two, that are involved in this situation. I think that the individual that we see on the camera is likely a stooge or a goon or a hired person or a confederate who wasn't as emotionally involved in this, who saw this essentially as a gig, a task. The lack of emotionality points not only to not particularly feeling invested in or caring about the victim, but can also point to a person who is way too cool under pressure when being about to commit, or having committed a horrendous offense, which can suggest a person with a kind of psychopathic character structure. Normal individuals, or even career criminals who are not psychopathic, are going to show a little bit of physiological activity when they're about to do something horrible. They're a little nervous, even just about capture. The only evidence of fear of capture on the video was the costume that the person wore, which was not especially professional. I do think that your question is in line with my sense that what we have here is what I've called the waiter and chef idea, right? That there is someone behind the curtain who's more intelligent, more scheming, and then the individual who actually carries it out, about whom I think the mastermind figure couldn't care less.
So you're intimating there was a mastermind behind this entire thing that, subsequently hired somebody else to conduct the abduction?
Or at least knows them, is in some confederacy with them financially or for some other reason. I think the motives of the individuals are a little different. Probably there's a financial element, but it's entirely possible that the person behind the curtain, who I am convinced to some degree, whether minor or major, knew the victim, that individual may have had a mixture of motives. There could have been an emotional element mixed in there too. Looking at this case very carefully, using statistics and likelihoods and years of experience with this stuff, I am convinced, as are many of my colleagues, that what went on here falls into one of two general buckets. We have ruled out the likelihood of a sexual motivation, a clear robbery situation that went haywire. What we're left with is the question of whether there was an abduction attempt for money that went south, and then somebody attempts to collect the money anyway through ransom, or there's some mixture of real attempt to collect ransom and phony people that are just parasitically trying to reach out to the family for money. And the second likelihood is that there is someone who knew the victim, wished to eliminate her for some reason, and created a charade of there having been an abduction where it was actually just a homicide. And when a ransom note is written, the person isn't even with us anymore. That is a phenomenon that in my work I have called elimination murder. And it is very typical in an elimination murder to create the impression that an outsider with no connection to the victim came in and did it. And you work very, very hard to cover your tracks and conceal your connection to the individual. However, if you're not a career criminal, you mess up and you don't fake or stage a more likely motivation for an intruder, like a sexual motivation or a robbery. And so what you're left with is the question of, well, then what? So people don't tend to do that very well when they try to do it. So I think one of those two things is going on.
Right. And so what I want to ask you is, in your experience, from the time that we see the guy at the front door in that doorbell footage, and the time that Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnects from her phone 42 minutes later, it seems like he spent a lot of time in that house. And what you're intimating is, to you, with the information at hand, it seems like this was somebody that went in there with the intention of harming her instead of taking her for ransom. Would that be correct?
That's one of two scenarios that I would propose. I also think it's important to remember that technically speaking, it is entirely possible that she was not actually taken from there or killed there. It's entirely possible that that happened elsewhere and somebody staged blood in the front of the house, the door being open in the back, and so forth, to give the impression of an abduction, but she is actually killed somewhere else. Or whatever fate befell her, I'm sorry to say, somewhere else. And the reason, of course, for doing that is to give the impression of a total stranger coming in and doing something. And it is in that context that somebody sending ransom notes can be part of a deception process. But notice there's never any proof of life in these. In a real ransom situation, based on statistics, generally the ransom note is communicated within 24 to 48 hours, and the matter is resolved in a week or less. And the reason is that the offender or offenders do not want someone in their presence for that long because it leads to too much risk of capture. And the person is precious cargo. You don't want anything to happen to them, or there's no financial value in the abduction. You certainly wouldn't have a person who was bleeding and didn't have their medicine or any of these other things that happened at this scene. That suggests to me a situation where somebody is already, unfortunately, possibly deceased or was injured due to something that exploded in the scene that wasn't expected. So what I'm implying is that it is entirely possible that that 40 some odd minutes was spent when there wasn't even a victim there. If the scene actually happened the way that people think, and I am inclined to think that she was at that house, but if that happened, it is entirely possible that what you had there was somebody ransacking the place looking for some item that wasn't something they were trying to steal, but something incriminating, something that was necessary for financial reasons in a larger way. In other words, you could be looking for something. But you wouldn't spend that much time there. Now, why do I mention that? Because one of the prime reasons for eliminating a person other than financial is that they know something, or that they've walked in on you doing something or are aware of something, and you have to get rid of them. And so in those situations, when you eliminate the victim, you go into their property and you take whatever it is that incriminates you. In other words, there are all kinds of things that could be going on when somebody is spending 40 some odd minutes in a house. But as I said, the two most likely situations: elimination, masquerading as an abduction where there was some need to eliminate her for personal reasons, or an abduction that went south and you try to get the money anyway.
So it seems like to me that you're obviously leveraging your extensive experience in the field and comparing cases that you've seen firsthand to this one. Is there a certain case that stands out to you that you can draw a parallel from?
It depends on which of those two scenarios is true. If the scenario is an abduction attempt that went south, the most infamous case that would come to mind would be the abduction of the Lindbergh baby, where to me it's pretty clear that somebody went, up a ladder to abduct that child, and between being placed in the duffel bag and carried down, the child died, and the offender tried to collect ransom anyway. And in that case, I think what we see is a mixture of motives where there's a financial motivation and also a desire for infamy, for connection to a prominent person, because forever you can't look up Charles Lindbergh with all of his achievements without reading about the person who took his child. So they're bound together forever in history, right? That's the one thing that happens. In the other case, when you're talking about what could be a staged abduction, there are many cases of what I've called elimination murder, where so a simple example that comes to mind is the Susan Smith case, where a woman had two children who were an impediment to a romance. Her significant other, her boyfriend, didn't want children, so she drowned them and created a story that a man pulled up in the car, carjacked the vehicle, took the children off, and then they were gone. And she cried crocodile tears on TV and so forth. So there, what you had was the staging of a story in which a total stranger with no clear motive did something where really the goal was to get rid of the children because they were an impediment to you. And so those kinds of stories are actually fairly common, but because you're dealing with unsophisticated offenders, they don't do a good job of it, and you catch them.
With the information at hand, is it possible for you to build some kind of a profile on who this person might be?
It depends if you're talking about the individual on the camera or the individual behind the camera. I am absolutely sure in my mind that this did not involve only one person for several reasons. But let's say we're talking about the person on the camera. The person on the camera appears to me to have some features of being, as I said, too cool under pressure. I don't believe this is this person's first rodeo with at least petty crime. And I do think that that individual has likely had some contact previously with law enforcement, because they're clearly callous and detached under that kind of pressure. And people don't develop those kinds of features overnight. You'd expect an individual to have traits like that going back all the way probably to childhood. So you can expect a person who likely has had some connection in some way, previous arrest, at least on the radar of law enforcement. And I do think they're local because of the comfort level that we see there. And I do think in some way they had some knowledge of the victim. Now, I would add to that individuals like that, while they are not particularly afraid of bodily harm or threat to themselves, do tend to be very reactive to interpersonal slights to their ego. And what you tend to see with people like that is that people in a geographic area remember them. They remember run-ins with them, bumping into them, an argument in a grocery store, whatever, because their reaction is too extreme. They don't forget about it. They become too angry about it because of the wound to the ego in that narcissistic core these people can tend to have. So I would look for somebody with some at least petty background in crime, who would be local, who would be known to people as standing out, as having a kind of a temper and a grudge, and committing those kinds of not committing, but engaging in kind of explosive rage when slighted. And I would also think that that individual has had some interaction with the underworld of the area, whether it's drugs, sex workers, things like that. Those are the kinds of people you would talk to. Now, you would show the image and you would say, look, I know that if you thought of someone you knew very well and you imagined them in a mask, you would still recognize them. If you wore a mask right now, I'd still recognize you, and I know you for only a few minutes. So chances are that person with that distinctive gait and so forth with a mask on would still be recognized as somebody that had seen him in day-to-day life. And I think what you would do is you would show that to people that are sort of in those areas of society that would likely interact with this kind of person. The person behind the scenes would be a scheming, reptilian kind of a person leading a double life, intelligent, cunning, would look almost like a pro-social figure to the victim, if there was some connection between them, whether it was minor or major, would almost come across as caring about her, but in fact would have no interest in her whatsoever beyond what he could get out of her. And I think what you probably had was a conjunction, a nexus between these kinds of characters to engage in a elimination or an abduction.
So that's really something you said was really interesting me. You said there were a variety of reasons that you believe multiple people were involved. Now, one of those reasons, obviously, is the state of the crime scene. Another one is the dichotomy, like I mentioned, between the ransom note and the person that we see on camera. Are there any other reasons you believe that you haven't already stated that two people are involved?
I just think that there's too much of a distinction in the whiffs of emotive intelligence, personality, and psychology that we pick up from the case that suggests to me more than one person. I just don't think that the person on the camera had any investment whatsoever beyond this being a task. And I just think that if that was the case, you would do this in a very expeditious, neat, well planned way. When you start to see things that are unnecessary or that go haywire or so forth, you start thinking emotion. There's some emotion that played in here, or the person wasn't intelligent enough to anticipate or sensitive enough to anticipate what human beings do when you come in the middle of the night and try to take them. But I think it is important to bear in mind that it is from the hints of there being different kinds of characters at play that I get that sense. What I envision, if there was a true abduction from that home or even an elimination in that home, you have to picture a situation where two or more people would be necessary to remove a person, place them in a vehicle, have somebody driving while the other person is, perhaps tending to putting the person in the vehicle, that kind of thing, like an escape vehicle and the person inside or something like that. You picture two people involved. I just think one of them got caught on the camera.
Do you believe that the person behind this is local to Tucson?
I believe everybody involved is local.
And why is that?
I just think that the comfort level, the familiarity, and also it's a very odd victim to choose. I mean, if you were choosing a person for ransom, you would pick a person who was independently wealthy and likely to survive. You wouldn't pick a person octogenarian who happens to be the first degree relative of a wealthy person and all of that. There's too many things about it that are a strange choice. The fact is that from a purely pragmatic perspective, there are other people you could have kidnapped that would have been easier targets, more likely to live, worth a lot more money, and would have had their own wealth. So I just think that the whole thing points to me to somebody that is trying to make this look like an abduction when it was something else.
It's interesting that you say that because, where Nancy Guthrie's house is located in relation to Tucson, in the Catalina foothills, it's a very deserted area. There's a lot of space between her house and her neighbors. And it seems like, because no other video footage has come out, at least to the public's knowledge, that after the abduction, had it taken place at her house, they knew exactly the route to take where they wouldn't be seen by any cameras or any other people. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And yeah, I mean, it's probable that they were Tucson locals. Can you think of any other motives behind why these people might have conducted this abduction?
If it was a true abduction, the primary motivation is usually financial. And in most abductions, which actually are quite rare in the United States, most abductions are by people who know you. They're mostly of children with sexual motivations or in custody situations. When you're dealing with an elderly person, it's very, very strange to abduct them unless there's a financial motive. But as I said, it's a poor choice for somebody to take ransom because there's too much danger to the individual in terms of not surviving. If it is something that is being staged to look like an abduction, the general reasons that you see in an elimination homicide are an emotional one, like you simply loathe the person for some personal reason, right? And in those situations, you tend to see extra activity, like overkill activity or things that show the passion or the anger that you feel towards the individual, unless, of course, you're using a hired gun or a person to look like, a stranger did it. And the other things that you might see are the elimination of impediments, like somebody is in the way in a line of succession to something financial or will. Somebody is in the way of a romance. Somebody has witnessed something and knows too much incriminating about you. Or another common one would be, let's see, witness, money, romance, impediments. I mean, I think those are the, oh, and someone being a burden. If somebody is a burden in terms of health, you sometimes, I'm aware of cases where people eliminate loved ones that they're tired of taking care of and they want to go off somewhere and live a different kind of life with the money that they'll get, and they don't want to take care of the person anymore. But those kinds of situations are not uncommon. But what I want to emphasize is, whereas I do think that the people involved, certainly the primary person behind the scene, knew this victim in some way, that could be anybody. That could be a passing relation, like a person who worked in a house or knew the layout, or contractor or something like that. Or it could be an intimate, a person that you really thought cared about you in your private life.
Doctor, thank you so much for your informed perspective. I appreciate your time and thank you for joining me today.
Sure, sure.